Hi, I am Kyle Cordes, and today I'm going to do some live coding in Angular 2, working with streaming data. I work at a company called Oasis Digital, where one of the main things we do, in addition to software development, is training people on Angular 2. So let's get started. The technology we're going to use behind the scenes is called server-sent events. You could think of server-sent events as sort of half of a WebSocket, only the downstream part of a WebSocket. The reasons why I'm using server-sent events and not WebSockets are that it is a more standards compatible technology. It's more closely based on HTTP, and so it tends to be a better choice if your application only needs downstream streaming data. Okay, you can look at the server code that I am working with in just a moment here on this repository that I have up on the screen. But I'm not even going to look at that code today. I'm going to go back in a later video and explain how this server works on the inside. For today, all I really care about is getting up and running on the client part. So to run the server, all you need to know is npm start. This assumes you've already done an npm install. So I'm going to run this server, which you can do again by going to that website. And then I already have a web tab up with localhost 8005. So this is what the server does. It generates fake foreign currency exchange bid and ask data. It's not particularly realistic. It has a vaguely realistic feel to how the data moves with time, but it's not intended to have any values that are realistic. But what we see here is a tiny little program written with just a little snippet of JavaScript. So let's look at what's happening behind the scenes here. If I just take the shortest possible look here and say, what does this program do? Well, you can actually read the script in line. Ooh, I guess it's hard to do it that way. Let's just do it this way. So here's what the program does. It creates one of these event sources. So an event source is the client API for talking to SSE, server sent events, and then it registers an on message and it manipulates the DOM. So without using any kind of Angular, that's the least I can do to get streaming data coming into a web page. So moving on from there, what I really care about is Angular 2. So to get us started more quickly, what I did over in this other directory is I already did an ng new, and I'm not going to do an ng new now because the Angular CLI is a great piece of technology, but it is currently kind of slow to create a new project. So let me show you what I've already done. I did the ng new and I got this commit right here created for me. And then I did just a tiny bit of getting ready. So, I put in a file to let my preferred IDE, Visual Studio Code, have it use the correct version of TypeScript. I decided not to ignore that file because I like having that file in the repository when I move to another computer. I grabbed this event source polyfill just in case I wanted to try this on Internet Explorer. At the moment, we need a polyfill on Internet Explorer. I cleaned up the README file a little bit from this one that's generated. And lastly, I took that bare minimum amount of code that it takes to get up and running with SSE, the bare minimum event source code, and I just stuck that in a comment. So what I can do is get our Angular CLI application up and running. So that's ng serve. And then over in the browser, I'll go to 4200. And this shouldn't do anything yet because this is just a raw starting point Angular 2 program where all I have done is gone to the one generated component and put some code in a comment. That's why it doesn't do anything yet. So what I'm here for today is to start incrementally live coding this into how a high-grade Angular 2 application should work. So I guess the first thing is to make it work at all. So let's just try uncommenting this code. So if I uncomment this code, we're going to console log it. So if I go over and look at the running program with it uncommented, I should be able to see some data flowing in. Well, so that makes sense, right? I mean, I didn't really change anything. It's not really doing anything, and so by console logging, Angular doesn't care about any of this. So this is kind of cheating, but it's a little something. So let's try to make the data appear on the screen. So we already have this title, which is appearing right there. let's go ahead and, instead of saying console log the data, let's just see if we can get some data to flow onto the screen like that. So, I see that it's recompiling. Now it's reloading. Uh-oh. So I thought I was changing this title. I see that the callback is happening, but nothing's happening up here. Well, it turns out that even this little tiny step into event source, we are stepping into an interesting aspect of Angular. So let's try putting a button on the screen. So let's imagine we just had some unrelated button on the screen, and we had some function that button could call. So here we have a slightly more complex Angular 2 program. It has a button that doesn't do anything. Let's click that button. Okay, so still nothing happens when I click the button. Well, that's interesting. So this title is being changed. Well, what if I set the title down in here? Right, so what if I programmatically set the title in my button handler? Let's try that. Well, sure, that works. Now, so what could be going on here? Well, it turns out I've intentionally fumbled a little bit. I got lost in the JavaScriptness here. So look, the this down here, that this corresponds to this function. So the quick and easy way to make this be correct, by literally I mean make this be correct, is to use an arrow function which will preserve and capture this. So now let's try it and see what happens. Oh, that's odd. It's still not changing. I can make it say hello, but it's still not changing. So I think I'm touching the right this. Maybe these two things are interfering with each other somehow. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. Each time I click the button, the component updates, even though it's flowing down below. Now, people that have first learned Angular 2 will probably find this extremely confusing. Those of us who have been around the block a couple times with Angular 2 realize we have run into an edge case, right? So the edge case is that Angular 2 behind the scenes uses this technology called zones or Zone.js. Zone.js hooks into essentially every browser event. And when those browser events happen, Angular 2 uses that as a hook to know it has to re-render what's on the screen. So basically, whenever any browser event happens, so when this browser event happens and this handler gets run, even though there's no code in here, Angular 2 takes that as a hint that at this moment it should re-render the component. And that's why this change takes effect. This event source thing I brought this in a really trivial way. By the way, for anyone not following the TypeScript, I said const fx equal this thing. So this is a way of basically saying, give me access to this guy in an untyped manner, right? So I didn't bring him in a difficult, complex TypeScript-friendly way. I didn't import anything. I just literally said, grab this global thing and make it fx. Actually, let me find out. Maybe there's some good typing. Nope, there's not. Okay, so back to the zone problem. So behind the scenes, zones is catching every event that Zones has heard of, which are basically everything built into the browser, including click. So Zone is catching that and causing Angular to re-render. Well, event source that's kind of at the frontier. So let me see here, Zone.js event source. Let's find out what's out there. Ah, well, look at that. There is an open issue asking for Zone to support event source. Okay. Well, if we see that it's not done yet, I'll tell you what. Maybe I'm going to go ahead and click that because I would like that to happen. Also, here's somebody put in a workaround here, but I've used this enough to know this is really not necessary. You really don't have to make a new ng zone. You can just get ng zone injected. So ng zone, this is your way of accessing Angular's interface to Zone.js, and I'm going to avoid caring about that too deeply by just let me see here, by just injecting the one that already exists. So I'm going to say something like zone is my ng zone. And then, oh, looks at that, I need to know where ng zone came from. Well, I happen to know that's a pretty important built-in feature, so that's right there in Angular core. And if I perform my update inside a zone run, so if I say zone.run, so I say do this work, and then I hand it a function. Now I'm telling Angular that it needs to do this work. So you could sort of think of this, think of this as the new scope apply for those who came from Angular 1. It's not quite the same thing. It's a lot more sophisticated behind the scenes, but you could think of this as what you have to do now in the very rare edge cases where you're using an API that Zone has never heard of. So I've only had to do this maybe 2 or 3 times, having written an enormous amount of Angular 2 code, still hardly ever hit this case. So just keep your eyes open. If you hit the edges of Zone.js, occasionally you have to do some minor workaround like that. So let's see what happens. And sure enough, now it's updating right away. Okay, so now I've kind of done the bare minimum here. I think I should take one more step though before I bail out here. So I'll take one more step before cutting to another video, and that is, I feel bad about doing this work right here in line. I feel like I shouldn't do that. Right? This doesn't seem like a reasonable place to be talking to low-level APIs from inside my top-level component. So what I think I should do is I should go stick this somewhere else. So this code should be somewhere else, and it should somehow expose a callback where the work happens. But I was first going to write my own callback, but then I realized that, well, this is a stream of data. This really should be in an Angular observable. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to factor this out into an Angular observable, and then put that observable eventually in another file. Okay. Let me see here. So let's call this thing, call this, oh, am I making a new file still? There we go. Let's make a new file. Call this, call it SSE. May not be a great name. So basically what I want SSE to be is I want it to be a thing that will take a parameter like this and will give me back an observable of the data that comes back. So let's start refactoring in that direction. Well, actually, you know what? Before I do this refactor, I want to make this most basic code available to anyone who wants to follow along. So I will check in just that file. So use event source, let me see here, from the app component. Bad coding style here. Okay, so just in case anybody reads this, they won't think this is how you're supposed to do it, but at least it's up and running, right? So there's the most basic thing. So, and I will, by the way, push these to a repo, and just to show what repo, right here. So if you just go to this GitHub repository, I will be pushing all this work right here if anybody wants to just play with the code nice and easy. Okay, so where was I? So before I wrap for today, I want to do this from another file as best I can. So first I want to get things that should be parameters out of the code that I'm going to be factoring out. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking of this as the code I should be factoring out. But what I'd like to do is I'd like this inner callback. I want this to also be in this outer code, but I don't want to go hand code that. What I really want to do is I want us to subscribe to it, right? I want to subscribe to this thing as a observable using all that built-in stuff. Okay. By the way, I also see that I'm going to need access to Zone when I move this code out. So this thing here is going to have to contain an Angular service. So I'm really lazy, so I'm actually going to just paste all of this code in and start editing from there, because I find it easier to paste in all the code and delete some. So let me get in here. So I think I'm not actually required to do this, but it's good style, according to the style guide, to mark things injectable if you might plan on injecting them. And then in here, I'm not going to need that. I am going to need that thing. I'll hold on to a reference to that zone. In my constructor, I'll just hold on to that reference. And what I really want is I want a function here. And if I don't have a function name, I just call it foo to start, then I rename it later. So I want a function, and I want that function to take an SSE URL, which is a string. And so that SSE URL is the one that I want to go with there. And then I guess, well, I don't want to pass a callback, because if I passed a callback, that'd be kind of the old style. What I really want to do is I want this thing to return an observable, and that means I need observable. And I recently have seen a lot of examples where people are typing this code. And this code is actually not such a great idea. If you do this today, as of December 2016, you will bring in all of RxJS, including all of the operators. You probably don't want to do that if you're going to be production bundling. That's probably going to blow out your code. So you really want to import observable this way. There might be some future technology advancement, so it wouldn't matter. I mean, ideally it wouldn't matter, but for today, you really want to do what I just wrote. Okay, so this thing here should return an observable, and I'm not quite sure what type it will return. Let's just say that it's going to return an object of some kind, because we don't know what it's going to return. Okay, and then here, get the right syntax. Okay. So this thing needs to return a value, which is fine. Okay, so now I have to think, how do you make up your own observable? Well, I believe we do something like observable, and then we pass this thing a subscriber. Okay, sorry about that. I had to answer a door, so I had to cut out a few minutes of noise from the video. Okay, so where were we? So I'd say we don't really know what type yet, so I'm gonna type that any, and then I want to return a new observable. And the API, when you want to make your own observable, when you kind of make one up by yourself, it's pretty simple. It's actually maybe even a little simpler than the Promise API. What you do is you make a new observable, and then you provide that a function, and that function will be called whenever there is a new observable, a new observer. Right? So so my function here will be called by some code I didn't have to write whenever someone wants to subscribe to this observable. So I just put the code right in here of the thing that should happen when there's a new subscription. Okay, so let's just take all this code for the moment anyway, and just try moving it in there. Now the first thing I see is that this const event source, that can actually go all the way out here, because that's not really part of any particular observer. So now, just getting a little bit closer, so now I make a source for the URL that I am being asked to subscribe to, and then that has to have an on message, of course. And then, let me see here. That event will happen the same as before. We will peel out the data the same as before, that we don't need to log it. We won't do this again, but we need to do whatever work has to be done inside of this zone run. And since I did a private zone to capture it, so I actually got to say this.zone run to make it the same. And then in here, I don't just want to do that, right? Because this code would have to be run by the application, and I'm trying to write code inside my SSE thing. So actually, while we're in here, I'll give it a new name. So I'll name that SSE. And then, well, I actually want to provide the data to whoever subscribed to me. And so the way you do that is you just do obs.next data. Okay, so now I've kind of made this transformation of the system, twisted it around the other way, and I have it all kind of where the data should flow the same way. But I'm actually missing something important, and that is you're really not you're really not supposed to just leak the subscription, right? So this observer thing, you're allowed to provide a hook for unsubscribing, and the way you do that is by right here I need to return a function, right? So if I return a function here, this function will be called when someone unsubscribed from my stream. So I can kind of fix leakiness just by providing a function right here. And it turns out, I just happen to know, because I've coded with the event source before, that you can call close on an event source. So this fx, that's really an event source, and I think that should have a more generic name, like that. So I have this new event source, I set up its onMessage, and then I return a function that when called will close that event source. So this is a reasonably okay, pretty simple, free of any error handling. It's a pretty simple way to handle SSE as an observer, as an observable. So what I really want to do is I want to get this thing tied into the other code. So let's see here, create SSE. How about observe SSE? We'll call it that rather than create observable. Observe. All right, so if you call this thing, it'll give you back an observable. Okay, so this SSE thing, I want to use it from here, so let's just kind of do the simplest way to do that. So just a little bit of Angular dependency injection. So we want to do this, and it looks like I want to use something, so I have to import it like that, and then I want it available, so I'll do that. And now I don't want to do any of this code anymore. I'm going to simplify this in a minute. But I can tell that when I use this thing, I'm going to say SSE.something. And as I look here, that means that SSE and observe SSE, that's kind of, that's a little too many of the same words. So I'm just going to call this thing observe, and you give observe a URL. So I want to say SSE.observe. And at this point, we should have a very off-the-shelf observable, right? So what do you do with one of those? Well, let me see here. I want to observe that URL, and then you subscribe to it, right? And then when you subscribe to it, in the simplest form, you're just going to get some piece of data. So I'm just going to take that piece of data, and I think what I'll do, all I should have to do is this. So I think I've now twisted all this code around so that, again, there's no error handling, and I'm not even bothering to unsubscribe this observable, but I'm just doing the bare minimum here. I should now have a reasonably, sort of following the standards way of coding Angular. Let's see if I can make it work. Recompiled, and sure enough, it does still work. Okay, so I think that is all I'm going to do for today in this video. So thanks for watching, and please stay tuned. I'm hoping to make a series of these where I explain and go on with different aspects of this development. So thanks for watching.